Good afternoon. Michel Auder, the artist who currently is showing his video work at Kunsthalle Basel in a major exhibition which is entitled Stories, Myths, Ironies and Other Songs, conceived, directed, edited and produced by M. Auder. This is M. Auder. My name is Szymczyk. I'm the director of Kunsthalle Basel and the curator of Michel's exhibition. The talk is going to be about 50 minutes and we'll take some questions towards the end. And just to open it up a little bit, and not from a film side, but more on the literature side, I wanted to introduce a certain title, which is probably as interesting, although slightly less lengthy than the title of our exhibition. And it's a title of a very special novel by a French writer. You're French, so I thought it good to start with something from your compatriot. Raymond Roussel wrote a sort of manual helping people to read his extremely complex and highly coded novels, and this manual is titled Comment j'ai écrit certains de mes livres, which translates into English as something like how I wrote.
How did I wrote some of my
how I wrote,
works,
yeah,
my
how I
books.
wrote certain of my books. Therefore, I'd like to make a detour here and go back to your films and apply a similar strategy and ask you how you made certain of your films. And I think it will be very handy to begin with the first film that you're showing in the exhibition at Kunsthalle Basel, which is titled Chronicles Morocco, 1971-72.
Right.
This is chronologically the oldest film, the earliest film in the exhibition.
Right.
The exhibition doesn't follow otherwise a chronological order. It just begins with the earliest work and it ends with the most recent work. And in the middle there is a number of films that don't follow any chronological order. So let's begin with Chronicles
Right.
Morocco.
I mean, I could answer also the question that the way the book is written by.
Raymond
How
Roussel.
did I come to write my book? And I could quote Jack Spicer, the poet, the American poet Jack Spicer, saying, "My vocabulary did it to me," which is a book of poems by the pre-beatnik American Jack Spicer. So, Morocco was. I went to Morocco to make video works, as usually do, and so I engaged there, and I kept some kind of filming, more or less, what's going on around me all the time, and what my vision of the world as I see it. So rather than you have the whole world here, like a whole room, and I guess as a filmmaker, I would decide to reframe somewhere in a corner or something I see that I think is interesting somewhere as I look, and I did that in Morocco. So I kept some kind of we traveled and engaged into different places, and I have a lot of work, a lot of hours that made in Morocco. And then when I came back to America a year later, I looked into the material and made a work. And the first half of the work is like a 30-minute work, something like this. Starts to be images and observation of what's going on. You see landscapes and people, lifestyle. And then I decided to change radically the subject matter. And in the same time, I also visited a group of people, a group of artists in Mogador, and this person, this artist, Michael Buta, who's a German artist, had a lover there, a Moroccan lover, and he was interested in looking at the camera and he wanted to make a film. So I kind of like made a reference to Pasolini because here is this gay couple and he wants to be in a film, and I said, okay, I'll make a film with you. And he said, I'm Sinbad the Sailor. And he actually created almost the entire story, narrative. And he said, I'm Sinbad the Sailor. And he said, well, I got to go to the island. There was an island, which was an old prison. And I didn't know what I was going to do, so we kind of hired a boat. And he actually, with a few other Westerners, European people and American, but I cut them all off. So you only see, if I can make another work out of this, where we can see all the artists, and we're all around looking at him. So I kind of like controlled it, and only him. And he said, he showed me the island, like it's his island, and then there was a lot of birds, and he just picked up some eggs, and the birds are really freaking out. And then he comes back in with the eggs in his underwear. He's only in the underwear, and then he cooked the eggs, which was fantastic because everybody was saying, no, 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 there is birds in there, or something like that. So we don't see any of that. I'm giving you like the gossips of the film, which is not really important. It destroyed the whole film when I'm saying that. But that's the way I work. It's like all kind of things are happening, and there's none of that. And you may think the part I'm telling you is more interesting than my film, but it's not what you're going to see. So basically it's him. So that's the power of film. And suddenly this character, this person, is doing amazing things, and then he catch a bird and strangled it and turned his head off and pulled it out. And then everybody is totally freaked out, but you don't see them. They're all like, oh, no, or everything like this, and I'm just filming it. I'm not really, I don't really appreciate it, but I have to do it because that's what's happening, and that's what I do. I make films, and I'm looking at people doing things, and then he bring back again at the spot the bird and cook it and eat it, which is fantastic because that's the way that's the way we do. That's the basic of life. And at the same time, he's showing his muscles and his dick and stuff like this. You know, everybody's going, ah. So like I remade some, you know, I saw Pasolini a lot of time, and I think I filmed it a bit like that because I was influenced by Pasolini's films, his kind of work. So that's how this work came about. But of course, I came with my ex-wife, with Viva, that I was married to, and she was there, and she got very angry at the Moroccans because they were talking to her when they said, so she left like 15 days after we arrived, and I stayed like 8 months with my daughter, with a baby. So I made another work where it's called Chronicles Morocco with Viva, because I cut her out of everything too all the time because we had a big fight. She said, I don't want to be in the film ever again. So I just sliced out everything that Viva was in. And then later on, in the late 90s, I made the Chronicles Morocco with Viva, which is quite around the same background and everything, but it's a completely different film. Mm-hmm. We haven't. That's how I work on this project.
Yes, so basically here we have like 2 or 3 different versions of the same story or narration that can be built out of the events that you filmed at a certain time. So there are alternative versions of Chronicles, one could say, right? Mm-hmm. So alternative versions of story that can be told in many different ways.
Right.
And I would like to ask about the way you bring a certain genres in literature into your films already in the titles. And here we have the Chronicles. Elsewhere we have stories and myths and songs. Then we also have variations, Roman variations. And all these titles that seem to be fairly generic, they are used rather regularly and in a very precise way, and they seem to point at a certain way of constructing narrative that seems to have a lot in common with literature. And I wanted to ask you about your relationship to certain kind of literature, to structuralist writing of French authors, but also to surrealism, and the way, you know, these 2 different ways of building the story sort of converge in your films, the kind of associative method of surrealists, and what you mentioned about Jack Spicer, your vocabulary did it to me. Mm-hmm. That seems like well, this could come from a structuralist, but it's also kind of super personalized. So these two things, like structural approach and very personal approach, and how does it come together in your work?
I mean, it's also probably, since I just picked it up, but not really intellectually, it's just me. And I think, let's say that I invented structuralism in my own way without really reading or studying it, because I stopped going to school when I was 17. So I have all these influences that I have, like I read books and poetry, a lot of poetry when I was young, but I don't really have any connection to any of that. But of course, I can see that it works out. But I don't really have any people to quote. I'm totally on my own, and it just come that way.
I see. Maybe you can explain the same issue a little bit by just talking about the second film that we have in the exhibition, which is Endless Column,
right?
Which is a film which, well, one could say that this film is all about sort of live selection from the existing material. Mm-hmm. It's a succession of images that are going very, very fast, sometimes a little slower, right, but mostly rather fast. And then there is a sound of clicking that is showing that you are sort of like opening files or maybe actually writing with images, right? This is the kind of suggestion that comes from the soundtrack of this film. Could you say something about Endless Column, which is a film made in 2011? Right.
Well, it comes from like the software first. When I make my work using a phone, because I realized a couple of years after I was using the phone that I was actually making works in my phone. I didn't really think of it that much at the beginning. But then when I keep everything I record, because I think if I record, that means I'm doing something, because that's what I do. I record things and sounds and images. But the phone was like, kind of came to me almost by accident, the work. But I started to use the phone. But then I looked at them and I used some program, I won't even mention the name, doesn't matter, that click the photo and you can see them going back and forth. And of course I said, I could see a work. I spent like, I would just look at my photo work and video work from the phone, and 2 hours later I would still be working at it, going back and forth and making films. And I said, well, I'm making film for myself. Like, I'm in the studio and I'm engaging into those things. And 2 hours later, I'm still making my film and I'm really like, dig it. So I decided to like make a work out of it. Then I play piano. I don't know how to play piano, but I play piano for many, many years. And for some reason, many pianos fell upon me in my studios. People that gave them to me or something like this. And up to last year, there was still a piano in my life. Right now, I don't have one. But I don't know, I don't have any, I can't play a song or anything, but I play the piano, and you can hear it in my work. There is you can hear the piano sometimes, and usually it's me playing. So I kind of like thought I could play some music using the keyboard, and in the same time connecting the images that I see, and then re-editing it together. So I just went, and then like, I was kind of like playing some music. And then when I saw some images that were more interesting, I would go back a little bit and go forth. And then I put my phone next to it to record the sound. And then I recorded the whole sound and the image. So sometimes they're not in sync, but the last 10 minutes of the piece is totally in sync, and they go. And then I recorded many takes. And then I cut some takes that I like better of the content of the images that didn't look too much like, that I was more interesting to make sense out of the images that are showing. That's called Endless Column, which is a title of the sculpture of Brancusi, a great sculpture that he made called Endless Column.
Which is suggesting a certain open-endedness of this process.
Right.
But at the same time, this endless column seems to have a fairly clear, beginning and ending somehow. You're telling a story.
I mean, I always believe when I make a piece, there is a beginning and an end, because suddenly it's enough, and that's what it is. And so it's kind of like a strange thing, but I'm totally convinced that when it ends, I don't think I'm going to make like a 70-minute pieces or a half an hour pieces or an hour. I don't think of time. When it's done, it's done. But a very interesting thing is I made many films without knowing how long they are. I just make them in the end, and I guess you're so controlled by life or something. I often finished films that were made like at 28 minutes, which is like a common thing for like a half documentary or whatever on television, and often too like at 58 minutes, which is something more commercial that people can take, which is kind of insane because I never think of it. But of course I made 7 hours video works and 3 hours and 4 hours, but a lot of them and a lot of them are also 5 minutes when I look at them, which is kind of weird because that's when I have enough. When I enter that kind of system, after 5 minutes it seems to be done for different works type.
Okay, let's talk a while about one extreme example, which is not in the exhibition, which is I think 560-minute video work, which is a journal of your travel to Bolivia. Mm-hmm. Could you say how this project came about?
Well, almost like Morocco. Morocco, I made so far. I have more works, but the one I really put out is the one we see there. And maybe one day I'll put out 3 more works there in the project. So this one, I put myself in a situation where I travel and I alone for months at least, or 2. I stayed in Bolivia for 3 months, and then I just travel from one place to another. And I choose Bolivia because the people, there's only people left that are indigenous. The largest amount of indigenous people in the Americas, North and South, are in Bolivia. Everywhere else is just a small group, but they're 80% indigenous people. So I was interested. Also, they've been forced since the 16th century to speak Spanish, which I can understand a bit of Spanish. So it was better communication for me. And also, they are chewing coca leaves, which have been chewing coca leaves for the past thousands of years. And it's legal, and I decided I would chew coca leaves as I go along during my trip. And then I kind of walk and travel by myself alone and made some kind of notes about my travels. In the same time, I read a book from a writer and scientist from the 19th century or the end of the 18th century, Alexander von Humboldt. And he went down there so it was kind of interesting for me. And over this work, I have some friends, actors, voicing over his notes and what's going on when he traveled there. He's not really going, I mean, he went to Bolivia, but he saw somewhere else too, but I mix it up into the thing, talking about slavery, about how people are being treated and so on. He's a humanist, but in fact, he was crossing rivers on the back of some Indians too. So, but he was quite more humanist than other people were at that time. And so it's a very, very interesting writer. So I use that in my work. But this work, who is 560 minutes, we're not supposed to sit here and watch it. This is more like a book. You take it home, and whenever you watch it, you just put it on, and then whenever it's like there is really no beginning and end. Only the beginning is I'm getting ready in New York to live there, and I record all my departures and in the plane. And then when I come back, I'm in the plane again. I said, todo bien, and finally going back to New York. That's the beginning and the end. But everything else can be taken backwards, forward. It just goes through it and analyze my practice, how I report what I've seen and how I deal with people there. Mm-hmm.
Well, in the exhibition, we're showing 13 films, and the longest is 50 minutes, Roman Variations. The shortest is Made for Denise, which is 3 minutes. So the exhibition, in a way, tries to explore all these different durations and formats in your work. And could you say something just for comparison about the rather short film, such as Made for Denise, or other films which seem to be playing with the convention of a video clip or music video clip? such as, for instance, Polaroid Cocaine, which is based on the song sang by Ingrid Cavan to the words written by Jean-Jacques Schul.
Yeah.
Could you say a little bit about these very short forms that you that you produced?
I think the group of film we are showing are pretty much in the same category. Only some are longer and some are shorter, but they are made in the same kind of form. Because if I think of my other works, they have like, you know, like they're kind of like documentary mixed with fiction. And that's the group of work I have, but they're much longer. But so like Roman variations, it's 50 minutes because I call it variations, like Olympic variations and everything, because I think about music, variation. So it's like every day I'm coming out of a studio. At that time, it was a studio that we were invited by Barbara Gladstone. My ex-wife Cindy Sherman and I were like invited there, and she did the work, the famous works of hers called History Portraits. And I went out every day on a moped and filmed life in Rome, the way I know it. And that's cool. And it's a variation because it's like music. It goes back and forth on the same theme. I'm going out, I'm coming back, I'm watching television, I'm watching my neighbors down the street. They're in a little bodega, or whatever you call that, and they come in and out. Some junkies are coming in. The police is smoking cigarettes and throwing things. That's every day. It's not all in once. It's like every day. So I call it variations. And I use the music from television programs, so the same music comes over. And it's based on that idea of a piece of work and music as a variation. What were we talking about?
Made for the Knees, Polaroid Cocaine.
Right.
And the pieces in which you used specific music soundtrack.
Right.
Often borrowed from you know, from popular or contemporary music.
Yeah. So those you could call these works video music. You know, like that's what it is. Where like I use straight music without interfering into the music, and it's the background, and I don't touch it. And then first I'm thinking of an idea. So Made for the Knees was a letter I was writing to a woman that had left me. Suddenly, she said, you know, time is up, and like suddenly it was so I kind of like went back to my studio, and I was kind of shocked because I was still kind of engaged and everything, and I made that video called Made for the Knees, and that was my first video letter. I was like, I don't know, 77, 78. It was very rough thing. So I just like I had a photo of her, and I just cradled it slightly and everything, and work it with images that can bring emotions to the viewer and to myself. So it leaves to interpretation for the viewer, how the viewer can see it, and my personal interpretation of the images I use. Some my images, some reshot from television or any other images that I have around. And then Philip Glass, which was a friend at the time. He's still a friend, but we're not hanging around. But I said, can I use this music? He said, yes, you know. And then I put it over, and it worked out really well, and I readjusted a few things to put, and that was the piece. And then I put it on a VHS tape and brought it over to her building and left it there. I don't know if she ever looked at it or anything. But then it was a piece. That was how it was made, you know. And then Jean-Jacques Schul, who is my friend, is a writer. There was a Prix Goncourt in 2000, written that book in Great Cavan. And they gave me the music when they came to New York. They used to come to New York together, and I had that music, and I illustrated it, Polaroid Cocaine, by using close-up of images from the magazine, that were around them, but like just little details of photographs, not the whole photographs, like hands, but it was like maybe a whole person. So like details of things.
could you say something about the vocabulary of this particular work, Polaroid Cocaine? I mean, the type of images that you use. Like, could you say like which groups of images you took and how you organized them?
Well, there are. I decided to use mostly close-up of photographs from other people, like details, because I made. So I tried to put some kind of emotion about taking drugs, and when you're down but you don't have the drugs and you don't feel good, and something like this, and make bring some kind of anxiety. So it was my personal experience with drug. Not the funny part of it, and the fun part of it, but more like the scary part of it when things goes wrong. Is that the answer?
Could be. Okay, let's go to a very different format in your work, which is a quite special work that you've been busy with for several months, and you completed it in 2012, and it is untitled I Was Looking Back to See If You Were Looking Back at Me to See Me Looking Back at You, which is the title that none of us can remember, I think. That's why it's handy to have
it written down.
To have it written down. And being lost in this title is a little bit like being lost in lives of the people that you are filming in this work. Mm-hmm. Because as far as I can understand, the film is made in this way that you're staying in your apartment, right? Mm-hmm. And looking outside of the apartment through the window to the building on the opposite side of the street, right?
Two buildings, different buildings.
Different buildings.
Yeah, yeah. And just the view of like the thing.
Right, and you made well. This film is well. It's recorded during the night exclusively.
Right.
With occasional scenes from inside of your apartment where we see a little girl who is also busy, like sort of looking through binoculars.
Right.
Outside and inside, sort of like panning around. Mm-hmm. And then we see like the entire line of scenes from individual apartments, which we have problem locating within this building. So you never know like in which part of the building you are in, because you just see sort of dimly lit or brightly lit windows in which people are busy doing things.
Right.
Which again makes me think of literature in a sense of like Georges Perec. And this novel in which he's sort of describing the sort of cross section through the house,
right?
And like things people do in different places that you can never see like at once. But as a writer, he has access to all these different realities and stories of people in all those different rooms, which is what you brought together in this film. Could you say something about this film and about the one that is upcoming, which I think is going to be the day version?
The daytime version,
right?
And then there is like people walking version. That would be like a 4-panel kind of work, when I'm still working on, because I filmed for a whole year, also during the daytime and thing. I mean, this one reminds me also of there's a group of theater that has kind of like disappeared a bit nowadays. That was really important in the '60s, called the Living Theater, and they did a play. The first time I saw the Living Theater, they had a play, and they had cut up the stage in different levels and rooms, and they were all acting different parts in the full stage, and they were like actor doing things in a thing. But that's just one thing. But of course, I'm here. That's the way I work. So like people are gonna say it's voyeurism or whatever. But of course, like in order to make films, you have to look. Otherwise, you can't make any films. And then voyeurism has a specific definition, and it's not what it is about. I'm using the voyeurism technique. So I'm looking at people, but you cannot really tell who they are, and you cannot tell even their faces exactly who they are. So I'm not really hurting anyone. I'm just looking at us being in our apartments, and here I am. Like you go to study a lion, and you put a camera next to the water hole, and people are coming to the water hole to like the lion comes to the water hole and it behaves a certain way, and there's another one that comes and push it away because it's stronger or anything. So the same thing. I'm looking at the life in metropolis. It's not about New York or anything. It's about life in a big city that we all start to living in, and so. I just thought, I put a tripod, which usually I don't use, and the camera on a tripod, and I started to enter what's the vision of what we are doing. So it's that simple in a way, and I mean the work speaks for itself, really. I don't know how to like you know. It makes sense to me to make a work out of this, and I did another one before in '95 called Rooftops, another thing, which I was living in Soho, and my studio was in an office building, and I was on the 15th floor too, and I also made, but then I cut it with like children playing with bees going on, so I saw like it's a close-up view of suddenly not only people living on roofs and in their apartment, but then it becomes like close-ups of things.
Yeah, I think this is very interesting that you brought the rooftops and other scenes at this point, because I mean these two films, the one we were just talking about, I was looking back to see if you were looking back at me, to see me looking back at you, and rooftops and other scenes, they seem to me to establish like two different forms of staging. One which is a window that can be likened to a painting, to a tableau of sort, which has a certain depth, but it's not being played on a stage or on a surface, while the rooftop is a sort of stage. So one is horizontal, one is vertical. So they seem to be like two existing, let's say, architectures, which are at the same time being used by you as formatting devices to construct film in two very different ways.
Right.
I would like to now go to seemingly far more simple film, and the structuring device in the film I'm thinking about, which is called My Love, 1977, is a book. So it's basically a scene of like flipping through images of a book. Could you say something about this one and how you came to making it?
Yeah, Nicolas Saint-Phal gave me that book for my daughter, and then I looked at it, and I figured I could make some kind of reusing of drawings in close-ups, and I could intercut other images with the book. Actually, I was reading what's the words that she was saying. It's about love, and then people fall in love, and they love each other so much and everything, and then suddenly the love ends, and it's very cool because it's like the love ends, and I put it falls like a dead flower's petals, and I put the petals in a box, and it's the end. So she's not really crying about it or like I'm saying. It's just more like it was a great thing that happened, and we're moving on. So that's her philosophy in the book, and that's how I engaged to make film. Suddenly I say I got to make something out of this, and I was at the kitchen, and what's her name? The musician Laurie Anderson gave me. She had like a plastic 45 thing. She just had put out, and I forget the title of the song, but anyway.
Superman?
Superman, yeah. And I played it while I was reading the book. So those are, you know, and it became, for some reason, it became something that is still there, that it's an interesting work, that I think is interesting, and we're showing it.
Okay, so you read in English with heavy French accent.
Right.
A book by Nicky de Saint-Phal to the music by Laurie Anderson. That's what it is. Fine. I'd like to now ask you about a film that is perhaps, well, I would say maybe it's less personal than it may look. It's your self-portrait. It's called 48 Hours in 8 Minutes,
yes.
Which again brings in a very explicit way the issue of duration and how we can do. How we can deal with real time that we are interested in that limited time established by a film or any other container or format.
Right.
So could you say something, how come that you brought like 48 hours of your life in bed actually into this 8-minute movie?
It was It was probably a reference to the 60s filmmaking, like frame by frame. I've been interested in doing frame by frame time and frame by frame. I lost a lot of those films. I bought a Super 8 camera. It was on video. This one is on Super 8. I made a lot of Super 8, but they're all lost, but like hundreds of them. But in the 60s, but they have disappeared. But this was already in the 70s when I lived in the Chelsea Hotel and later, and I had this camera that you could regulate to go frame by frame. So I made many films, whether it's looking at the weather pattern into my studio and other things. And then one day I decided we are going to stay in bed for 48 hours. I made made a film about this, so you can see me sleeping and then waking up vaguely, and then again the light goes down and up.
On the phone.
And,
you were on the phone.
And on the phone. Yeah, it's got daytime, but because I stayed home all the time. That's why it was interesting to try to do something like this. And that's all I can say about this film. It's probably from looking at other films in the 60s that have been done like this too, that I kind of got interested into using that method.
So the film was born out of like life circumstances of a certain moment to which you gave structure by using like frame by frame.
I always want to make
Super 8.
films, so like things comes to my head and like this is the time to make this film, and then I engage into it, and it's one more film to express something later by using other films to the way I see how is it going on. It probably also has to do that it was kind of like attractive in a way to be able to stay in bed for hang around at the same place for 48 hours and making a work out of it rather than just staying there and be depressed or having like a hangover. This was more like there was no hangover. We make a film, so it has some kind of attractive thoughts to it, to be
and
able
purpose
and make it work,
Right.
So I'm working doing nothing.
Mm-hmm.
This could be cold.
Right. It's called 48 Hours in 8 Minutes.
Yeah.
The other film we show in the same gallery, Blind Sex, 1983, brings together two scenes which feel rather long, although the entire film is 5 minutes. I don't know how come they feel so long. One scene is the street, the prostitutes on the street, two guys talking to prostitutes, and another guy appears. There's like the guy who is polishing shoes on the street, and there is a guy approaching him and having his shoes polished, while the other two guys are talking to, I think, three prostitutes in front of a hotel. Then there is a cut, and there is another scene with a blind woman trying to cross the street, and two guys who help her to cross the street, and they switch at a certain point. What made you bring together these two scenes? Because I understand the kind of pun of giving a film titled Blind Sex,
right.
And it's not about making love with closed eyes or anything like that, but it's just like completely cold structural juxtaposition of two scenes on two different locations having seemingly nothing to do with each other and brought together in a sort of mini poetic line of the title Blind Sex.
Yeah.
So it's the words that bring it together, let's say.
Yeah.
Which again kind of makes me think of Raymond Roussel's writing method, where he's just switching one word in a sentence, and then the whole sentence starts to mean something entirely different. And this is how he begins the explication of his writing method in this book that I quoted in the beginning, how I wrote certain of my books. So just to talk about Blind Sex and how you made this film.
I made a few works like this, or where I just put something that is inside that is not connected to the story. So I see those two guys. I met my friend, he's a painter, and there is always prostitute there. And then so I'm filming at what I'm looking in the street, and there is those two guys. One of them wants to go to is like thinking about it, and then finally he hesitates. They talk to him, and so I get, for some reason it's just in front of me, and it's happening. So I can see the whole thing, and I make I find it really kind of interesting. There's a total story there. Also, the shoe man is also all the guys, because he's just at the entrance of the hotel. So this guy just come to have his shoes. He probably doesn't need his shoes to be done, but he's sitting there having his shoes done, and he can check out all the women that are come around. And then he's sitting, and he can see like different things, which one is interested in, something like this. That's the way I interpret it. That's the way I filmed it. And then I have this woman that is blind in front of my studio and another place, and like she came and she's like, somebody helped her out, and I shot those 2 shots, and they've always been in my mind all the time. I want to use them for something. And then I decided that I would call that film Blind Sex, and that's those 2 shots of this woman that's been waiting, and there's a big truck. She's almost going to be, she's not being run over because she knows what she's doing, but there's kind of enormous that goes in front of her. And then those 2 men, like the other one, are trying to help her. And it just jumped in my head, and I said, this is what I can use, that blind woman scenes that I extracted and put away into my collections of shots that come into the situation. And it made sense for me. Like, you know, that's the way it really come out in a more poetic form. But then I started to use that method in a few other films. One is called Reagan, where I put my daughter in it. First, it's like the shooting of Reagan that I reshot on television, like really close-ups. And then suddenly I had my kids.
Reagan being shot.
Yeah, Reagan being shot. So it's incredible, very interesting footage from television. There were a lot of television there. So I reshot it, I rescanned it, it's like close-ups of things. But then I had that, but then I had some great shots of my kids watching TV on a couch, and they're all going like this, and this. So then I put those shots like they are watching Reagan, but then they don't really care. They just go looking at it totally because they're watching something else. So it's like it's a juxtaposition that I found interesting, and I've used it in a few. I kind of like to do that, like, you know, like working like this, bringing things that are not conventionally explanatory, but you wonder what, are they watching it? Are they looking at, like, you know, like, but you know they're not. But meaning, yeah, Reagan got shot, but exactly, I don't really, I mean, it's sad, I mean, they get hurt and everything, but I didn't really get sad about it.
Another film that makes use of TV convention, or maybe a format of television, The Talking Head, which is surprisingly a child again. Mm-hmm. And the Talking Head in this film is telling us a certain story. Could you tell us how you made this film? It's made in '81 and edited 2009. What made you edit this very short sequence?
Well, I have quite large amount of my daughter at different age, including her birth, her looking at her birth, and all kind of things going there. So when she used to come and visit me in the late 70s and stay with me for a month or two, sometime we just started to have like a wireless mic that was like really modern. It was the first time you could have, I mean, they had them on television, but it was like very complex and everything. But it came out with a Mickey Mouse thing. And I wired her because she always kind of went grooving at some point, and then she just played by herself, and she's at a table and tell her own stories. And this is like when if you have a child, like, you know, it's kind of the best time. They're finally on their own world, and they're talking to themselves and everything. And I always wanted to catch some of that wonderful time where they're like, you know, out there, the world is not, nobody's bothering them, they're just like saying things. So I got very lucky. She was just talking to herself. And then since she was wired, I was doing other things, but sometimes I would be, and she didn't care. She was just like, she had that thing around her, but she was just like, totally, she's so used to be filmed or anything, she would never look at the camera or anything. She'd be just like, and then I just heard her talking, and there is more. There is even interesting too, but I kind of like just cut that little. It was just like begin, drop. That's all, and it was fantastic. People think she's writing something because she's like looking at a piece of paper that I think she's cutting or something, but the paper has nothing to do with what she's saying. And some people think it's my lines that are told her to say. It's kind of interesting. That's the beauty of film. It's like everyone has an interpretation thing, and everyone thinks I'm a voyeur, but the people that think I'm a voyeur are the voyeur because they feel themselves something in themselves that bring them to think that. Of course, I'm a voyeur. I kind of like what I'm saying, but it's not the point. So to go back to my daughter, I was like, I have few more extracts which shows the child in another film chasing the dragon. She's talking to me and telling me all kind of very interesting things, and we're like exchanging too. That is like really incredibly pertinent question that she's asking about life and things like this. So yeah, I made like that. That work is amazing. Like, you know, this is pure poetry at like a high level, you know, and philosophy, and like.
We have about 5 minutes to go, so we will take now some questions from the audience, if there are any. Anyone here? So the show has a question. You would be more than welcome to ask Michel.
I can read a bit of a statement about my work, because what we have there in terms of my work is only a part of, there is longer works, and we can't really show them in certain conditions, because especially like, you know, it needs more required to sit down and watch them like carefully. This you can. It requires to be watched, but you also can walk through the way Adam and I have organized it. You can walk through for 10 minutes and make a new film out of the whole thing. You can watch every one of them, like, you know. And those films, in a way, they are very connected. All of them are very connected in the method, you know. But you know, like, it would take another thing. I've been portraying the world around me, near or far, intimate or anonymous, in a decidedly subjective manner based on my own life and experience. I spent the 70s and 80s constantly filming those I lived with and socialized with, including many people from the artistic and cultural circles. I use this abundant material, often many years later, to make films where I developed my very own personal documentary approach. Since the end of the 70s, my video had branched out in multiple directions, including fictional films, films with highly autobiographical slant in which fiction and documentary are blended together, composition based on the scanning and refilming of television. Like, I'm looking at television the same way I look at the world. I just don't take the whole screen. I take a part of the screen, or I edit things out of the television to remake the sense of what television is saying, the one I understand what they are saying, and so I can re-explain what people are saying on television. And since my video branched in multiple directions, including fictional film, autobiographical, in slant with fiction and documentary, I blend together. Composition based on scanning and refilming television. Video based on loose association of images involving modes of visual thinking that rather come very close to poetry, which is, I think, that method that I love to do, and that I think what we have here is mostly that kind of style. Like, you know, it's like and
like speaking with images.
Yeah, speaking with images, and
which is, for instance, "Do You Love Me," which is the last film in the show.
Right. For instance, "Do You Love Me." It brings also an interpretation to the viewers. You like look at it, and you interpret it, and so everyone has their own kind of like feeling about them. So it's open to interpretation. It doesn't have one particular strong idea, like a Hollywood film where you have a story, a beginning, it ends, and like we're all happy. Anyway, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Is it a question? Yes, there will be a question, please.
Hello, Michel.
Hey.
It's been a
Hi.
while.
It's been a while.
I was curious to hear a little bit more about, I know that you don't engage in a writing process the way that a traditional filmmaker would work from a script to a final product, but given this huge catalog of footage that you've accumulated, I'm curious to hear a little bit about the moments when that footage comes into form, and how you would conceive of writing or scripting to create the works that you make.
Well, I think I'm always on, like I have a studio. My method is to have a studio with everything around me, like all the informations. And my work is to make films. So I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing, I don't know what I'm doing. And then when I'm really getting there, I'm just kind of looking at stuff. And then suddenly something triggers an idea. And then I think it's mostly like writing. It's really like writing. I have all my vocabulary around me, a large amount of vocabulary. I also can make more vocabulary out of whatever is around, especially now on the net, everything. So I'm here, and then suddenly, it's not sudden. It's just like for days, I'm thinking of things. I'm putting things aside. I'm thinking about this. I should do this. I should do that. And then suddenly I get engaged into a work. And then it takes me a month, 2 months, some are much more complicated. Or the other thing too is I have body of work, like for instance, the one I did Untitled from the windows. I filmed there for a year, so I know I have a body of work there, and I can make another part, the daytime part, and I can make another part. So maybe I come back to this, and then I get engaged into that. So it's like a bit like painting. It's between like painting and literature and writing, because it's all there. So I keep building up stuff. I could go in my phone. I want to make another film with my phone, and it's there too. So I gotta, that's the way it works.
It's a bit like Chinese painting.
I'm curious if there's anything like a set of ethics that you build up around the way that you accumulate these things. For example, do you ever reshoot or create pickup shots, or is there an importance to sticking to things that already exist within this catalog that you've accumulated?
I would really reshot something. Or maybe I've done it, but I'm not even sure if I probably have done it because I do everything. But like, it's not my basic thing. Then I will replace it with something. I will find a vocabulary that could, like, if somebody doesn't want to be in a film because they're upset, I know I can express the same emotion that person is there, and I can recreate it with other fragments of something else. So I don't have to use that person. Basically, unless it's a portrait of that person, then I just chuck it and it's over. But but if it's included into works, then if that person doesn't want to be naked, I can use another naked. I can have an image of a naked painting or something else, or whatever. If that's about that, for an example, for as a cliche, like something. But yeah, no, I wouldn't go like reshooting anything. Like I need. Those are the paint, those are the brushes. I should be able to mix it up so the color is right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Michel.
Thanks.